Wrestling is one of the most unique performance arts and forms of entertainment of all time. Having been around for decades, wrestling has evolved and changed. Wrestlers today are stronger, faster, and capable of incredible feats that wrestlers from past generations could only dream of. And yet, the art those wrestlers of past generations created lives on. Professional wrestling is a wonderful thing because at its core, it's storytelling, and that story can be told in endless ways. Because of this evolution, we have witnessed an ever-changing conversation where fans around the world have asked the question, who is the greatest of all time? Today I'm going to be answering that question. The GOAT Argument is a series where each episode I will be looking at a certain wrestler's career and body of work and telling you why they are the greatest of all time. It doesn't matter whether I believe it or not. I am putting my personal opinions aside and making an indisputable case for the wrestler in question. Besides, we all know who I think the actual GOAT is. Today, we are going to make the argument why Eddie Guerrero is the greatest professional wrestler of all time.
Oh, and by the way, Beaner Bronco Buster?
Yeah.
Where the hell did that come from?
Improv.
Oh, it's wonderful.
When we discuss the greatest of all time, we often look at championships, records, WrestleMania main events, measurable achievements. But Eddie Guerrero's greatness was measured differently. Eddie Guerrero connected on a deeper level. He didn't just wrestle matches, he created moments that lived for generations. He didn't just speak, he made us laugh, made us angry, made us believe. Eddie Guerrero embodied wrestling itself. Passionate, flawed, human. Some people choose wrestling, but others are called to it. And Eddie Guerrero was called from the moment he took his first breath. Born into the legendary Guerrero family, Eddie's destiny was set long before he ever stepped into a wrestling ring. Wrestling wasn't just a family business, it was their legacy, their culture. His father, Gory Guerrero, was a wrestling icon in Mexico, innovating moves and captivating audiences. Eddie grew up watching his brothers, Chavo, Hector, and Mondo, carry the Guerrero name proudly into rings around the world. Wrestling wasn't just something Eddie saw, it was something he lived. So it was no surprise when a young Eddie Guerrero stepped into the squared circle for himself, determined not to just follow in his family's footsteps, but to carve a path uniquely his own. Guerrero began his journey in the ring with humility, wrestling in small venues across Mexico, honing his craft in front of passionate crowds. He started his wrestling career at just 18 years old, and while he carried the Guerrero name, Eddie never wanted it to define him. He wanted his work, his relentless dedication to storytelling, and his fluidity in the ring to speak louder than any family legacy ever could. He wrestled tirelessly across Mexico, primarily in AAA, where he began to build his lying, cheating, and stealing persona, turning on his former partner, Elio Del Santo, and aligning himself with Art Barr to become one of the most hated duos in all of Mexico. Guerrero was proving that professional wrestling was in his blood, as seemingly everything came easy to him. It was at this point that Guerrero started to branch out, showing up in ECW and New Japan Pro Wrestling, where he was graced as the second incarnation of Black Tiger. It was in Japan that Eddie's raw talent evolved into something extraordinary. He learned to tell stories without words, creating drama and intensity through every move, every glance, every breath. Japan taught Eddie Guerrero precision. Mexico gave him flair, but it was his heart, his undeniable passion that ultimately transformed him from a talented wrestler into a performer who could truly captivate audiences across the globe. Across both ECW and New Japan, Guerrero had phenomenal matches and built real-life friendships with both Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko. Together they joined WCW. This was undoubtedly the biggest stage Guerrero had wrestled on, but he rose to the occasion, almost immediately being thrown into the fire with some of WCW's biggest stars, including Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Diamond Dallas Page. Now, Guerrero did quite a bit of losing, famously as he chased the WCW United States Championship, but he was building a name for himself, and fans seeing him on screen with stars like Ric Flair began to cement Guerrero as a star to watch. Unfortunately for WCW, Guerrero's time there was short-lived. WCW was a sinking ship, and a big reason for that was the lack of new stars. The talent was on the roster, but WCW failed to capitalize on basically any of them. Wrestlers like Chris Jericho saw the writing on the wall, and when they left, it did not take long for others to follow suit. Guerrero, Benoit, Malenko, and Perry Saturn famously showed up into WWF being coined as the Radicals, and while this moment is well remembered, it really led to nothing. This new stable was seemingly being positioned for a feud with the New Age Outlaws, but after Guerrero seriously injured his elbow in his very first match, the feud was dropped as Guerrero was sidelined for weeks. Fortunately for Guerrero, this might have been one of the best things to happen in his career. Guerrero returned with a recognizable flair we would all come to love. The Radicals were being positioned as a no-nonsense invaders, but when Guerrero returned, Latino Heat was in full swing. You see, professional wrestling is strangely not all about the wrestling. You need to have the full package, but what is the full package? I think there is no better example than looking at one of Guerrero's closest friends and Radical's teammate, Dean Malenko. You see, Malenko is undoubtedly one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and his career path is actually very similar to that of Guerrero's, with the two following each other from promotion to promotion. Malenko was positioned and given the same opportunities as Guerrero, but something was missing. Malenko, the man of 1,000 holds, could tell a story in the ring with 1,000 words, but when it came to cutting a promo, showcasing charisma, he struggled to put together a sentence. This is where Eddie Guerrero shined, and in a landscape filled with young talent such as Chris Jericho, Kurt Angle, and Chris Benoit, Guerrero fit in like a glove. Up to this point, Eddie Guerrero was on a steady upward trajectory. A trajectory that any wrestler would envy, from small arenas in Mexico to the biggest stages in wrestling. Eddie's story seemed like a dream realized. But as Guerrero's star rose higher and brighter in the wrestling world, the shadows lurking behind him grew darker, more powerful, and harder to ignore. Eddie Guerrero's struggles weren't always visible behind the $1 million smile and spectacular matches. Wrestling fans saw Eddie's charisma, they saw Latino Heat, but they didn't always see the man behind the persona. The man burdened by addiction, weighed down by insecurities, haunted by the immense pressures of legacy and expectation. Alcohol and painkillers became Eddie's escape. The tragic irony being that the very substances he relied upon to soothe his pain only deepened it. His personal demons took a heavy toll. Eddie's addiction strained his family, fractured friendships, and jeopardized his career on multiple occasions. In 2001, after showing up in no condition to perform, Eddie was released from WWE, seemingly losing the dream he'd worked so tirelessly to achieve. The man who'd captured the hearts of millions was suddenly alone, forced to confront his greatest opponent yet, himself. But Eddie Guerrero's story didn't end there. He faced his darkness head on, entering rehabilitation and rediscovering the strength that made him special, not just as a wrestler, but as a human being. Eddie's battle wasn't glamorous, it wasn't scripted, it was raw, it was real. Guerrero put in the work outside the ring. And on April 1st, 2002, only 6 months after his initial release, he was signed back to WWE. Guerrero showed resilience, and the WWE had lost no faith in him as he was immediately repositioned as one of the company's hottest talents, almost immediately beating Rob Van Dam for the Intercontinental Championship. Not long after, he was rubbing shoulders with the biggest stars in the business, such as Stone Cold and The Rock. And like Stone Cold and The Rock, Guerrero's talent and charisma was undeniable, and his rise to the top of the card was not a question of if, but when. Over the coming years, Guerrero would continue to entertain crowds around the world. He proved to be a valued member of the tag team division by winning tag team gold with his nephew Chavo Guerrero Jr., and even in an unlikely partnership with Tajiri. It was around this time that Eddie, Chavo, Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, and Edge would become known as the SmackDown Six, as these 6 men would tear the house down seemingly every single week in singles matches, tag team matches, and any other match you can think of. Guerrero was truly shining and even won singles gold again with the US Championship, which saw more fun feuds against the likes of Chris Benoit and John Cena. But still, something was missing. Time was passing fast, and what once felt like a sure thing, Guerrero winning a world title that is, started to feel further and further away. The WWE was simply stacked with talent, and while Guerrero was undeniably a fan favorite, there was a feeling that maybe there just wasn't enough room for him at the top. But like Eddie Guerrero had done time and time before, he shot down the doubts and made himself undeniable, finally positioning himself for a world title opportunity by winning a 15-man battle royal. Now, there was still doubts. I mean, WWE was only a month away from WrestleMania after all. Could they really have the world title change hands this close to the biggest show of the year? The answer was a resounding yes. Guerrero did not just finally get his opportunity. He rose to the occasion like he's done time and time again, elevating every aspect of his game. These 2 months, where Guerrero was built up to take on Brock Lesnar for the title and then defended against Kurt Angle, were some of the best work of Guerrero's entire career, both in the ring and on the mic. It was in the build-up to his match with Brock Lesnar that Eddie Guerrero tapped into the raw, authentic emotion that had always defined him, delivering one of the most powerful promos in wrestling history. Standing in the ring, microphone shaking in his hand, Eddie didn't play a character, he spoke as himself. He spoke as a flawed man who had hit rock bottom and climbed back up again, who battled demons that were far more terrifying than any opponent he'd face in the ring. In that moment, Eddie Guerrero transformed his vulnerability into strength. He didn't shy away from his struggles, he owned them, accepted them, and used them as fuel. Eddie looked into the eyes of the world and told them, "I'm addicted." With each word, he built a bridge from his heart to ours, reminding us that heroes don't have to be perfect. They just have to be real. And that's what Eddie Guerrero was, real. He turned his darkest moments into a connection that was deeper than any title belt or accolade. Fans didn't just cheer for Eddie Guerrero, they believed in him. Because Eddie believed in himself, scars and all. Now, I'm supposed to talk about the rest of Eddie Guerrero's career, but I just can't. I'm supposed to tell you how he lost the title to JBL and went on to face Rey Mysterio for the custody of Donic Mysterio. But I just can't. I could go on listing matches and feuds. Hell, I didn't even talk about Halloween Havoc. There's just so much to talk about when it comes to Eddie Guerrero's career, but I just can't talk about wrestling anymore. Eddie Guerrero's impact is more than what he did in the ring. Sure, you can turn on any wrestling show on any channel and see his influence, but Guerrero did more than that. Wrestlers win matches, wrestlers win championships, but Eddie Guerrero won hearts. Eddie Guerrero had something you can't teach, something intangible, yet undeniable. It wasn't about how many titles he held or how many WrestleManias he headlined. It was about something deeper, something raw, something real. Eddie didn't just step inside the squared circle and wrestle, he made us feel. He made us laugh until our sides hurt. He made us scream in excitement, and at times, he even made us cry. Whether he was a villain, bending every rule in sight, or the scrappy underdog fighting to overcome the odds stacked against him, Eddie always felt like someone we knew personally, someone we genuinely cared about. Eddie Guerrero was authentic, and in a business built on illusions, that's more powerful than any wrestling move. We are talking about the rarest kind of wrestler. We are talking about the rarest kind of human being, the kind who didn't just entertain but inspired. The kind who left a lasting impact, not because he had to, but because he couldn't help himself. Eddie Guerrero is not a wrestler, he is wrestling. And that is why he is the greatest of all time.
We've got familia. Raza, wey.